fellow bookworms, Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney, and today I have an ABC Author Challenge update for you. So we're going to be talking about my M author and one of my N authors. I say one because I did have to go by first name, and so I took a second author for that. But the first one is James Meek, and this is The People's Act of Love. Very interesting book. Still really not quite sure how I feel about this one, but we'll definitely talk about that. And then the other is Natasha Preston. Like I said, she's for my N because I had to go by first name, and this is the Cellar. I'm gonna go ahead and give trigger warnings now, so that way if you need to jump off, you can. This one deals with cannibalism and like mutilation of body parts, um, and starvation and such. So definitely something to keep in mind if you think you want to pick this one up. But we're definitely gonna get into that in a second. And then the other one, the Cellar, deals with kidnapping and you know unwanted sexual situations. So, definitely another kind of heavy topic in this one, but we'll definitely be talking about this as well. So, before I get into it, if you can remember to give this video a like, it does help out the channel, and then don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you don't miss out on a thing. So we'll go ahead and start with The People's Act of Love. Um, the whole time I was reading this, like, I could not figure out what was happening in this book. Like, I was so confused. I was like, how in the world did this author even come up with this? Like, what is happening? And then I get to the end and I read the acknowledgments, and this is actually based on real things that happened. So it takes place in 1919 mostly. It does have some flashbacks to earlier times, but mostly 1919, and it's kind of during a time where it's like civil war for Russia. And that is based on true events. So you had the Reds, which were like the revolutionaries, and then you had the Whites. And in this one, you have the small town essentially, and Samarin is an escapee from like prison camp up north in Siberia. And so he's an escapee and he ends up showing up, and when he shows up, the local shaman ends up getting murdered. Um and so he has this like crazy story. He says that there's somebody that's been following him, that's coming, and he's dangerous, and he's a cannibal. So then you also have this religious sect, which is the bulk of the town, and they mutilate their body. They remove body parts essentially because they think they're the keys to hell, and they need to be removed and thrown in the fire. So you have them, and they spin to talk to God, and that really, you know, happened as well. So you not only had cannibalism, like people were starving, and so they would have companions and they would plan to eat them. So they would make sure, whatever food there was, that their companion, was able to get enough of it to stay, with some meat on their bones. And then they were planning on eating them. So that really happened, and this religious sect, which were called, I forget what they were called, started with the S. And what it wasn't called, they weren't called that in the book, but when I was doing like looking it up to see, they had a name. But anyway, they're called the castrates because they literally castrate themselves, and that really happened as well. Like there was really this religious sect. So, but when I was reading that, I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know it was based on real things like that. And so I was just confused. And so you have this town, and each of the players, so you have the religious sect, you have the Czech soldiers, and then you have Anna Petrovna, who is a widowed mother. I think her boy is about 9-ish, I want to say, based on what I could figure out. And so she's this widowed mother living with this religious sect, and then of course you have the Czech soldiers there as well. And so they each kind of have their own personal conflict. Like Anna, she's a widow, and she also doesn't live like this religious sect, and so she's, seeing one of the Czech soldiers and such, and so she's not really fully accepted. It's kind of confusing why she's even there at all, which you learn why she is. And then this religious sect, the kind of leader of the group, struggles a little bit. He really believes kind of what he's doing and why he did it, but he struggles, to fully reach that angel status, I guess. Very unique. And then you have this Czech soldier. So you have Matula, who is like the leader, but he's kind of sadistic and he's keeping the men there. Um, but he's trying to get them to turn on one of the other main characters, Mutz, because he's like a German, he's Jewish and German, and so they don't really trust him and he doesn't fully fit in. And so Matula is trying to blame the fact that they're still in this little town and not able to go home on him. And so it's kind of this, very, you have politics within the Czech soldiers, and then you have the Reds coming in at the end, and so you have the Reds against the Whites again. So, very unique book. And like I said, the whole time I had no clue what was going on. And each of their personal kind of conflicts end up resolving, but the story as a whole kind of ends with the Reds and the Whites together, and kind of the Whites having the Czech soldiers having to figure out how to get the Reds not to just kill them, essentially. But so unique. I did end up giving it 4 stars. Um, Even though I was confused the whole time, it kept me intrigued. Like I was trying to figure out what was going on, and I did enjoy the writing overall. Um, but I can see that this book would definitely not be for everyone. Like I see a lot of people not enjoying it, and I see that I was reading some of the reviews on Goodreads, and I could definitely see that divisiveness. Or yeah, and so yeah, it's not for everyone, but I actually enjoyed it, and I enjoyed, like, that's something I would never have known. I would have never known about the castrates, and I would never have known about this religious sect at all, and I would never known that people really were, kind of taking companions with them in order to eat them because they were starving. Like I would never known that really happened in Russia. So yeah, very very interesting, but definitely not for everyone. Like I said, I did give it 4 stars. Um I probably gave it a little bit higher scores than what it deserved. But like I said, I ended up enjoying it in the end. So I ended up giving the characters an 8. And I really like the portions of the book. Like there's one portion where it flashes back and it's kind of Anna's backstory a little bit. So it's, her kind of growing up a little bit, like when she's a teenager and about her father and such. And then when she met her husband, who was a hussar, I want to say is how you say it. Um, but he was scared of guns. And so when he became a hussar, they weren't like actively fighting or anything like that. So he was able to kind of get away with it. But then they get sent off to fight. And so yeah, you have that portion, and then just kind of her journey and how she ended up in this town to begin with. Um, and then it has Samarin, like he's the escapee convict, and it's his story escaping from the prison, so it flashes back kind of to that and how he escaped the prison. And then this companion that he was with, um, that he learned, that he was going to be used for meat essentially. And yeah, it's so crazy. But I gave the characters an 8, and I really enjoyed the portions where it kind of looked deeper into like their backstories. Those were by far my favorite portions of the book. Atmosphere I gave a 9. Like you have like northern Russia, like very cold. I thought the atmosphere was very good, and even the small town like feel like you felt it. Writing I gave it 8. I did think the writing was pretty good. Like I said, I the first 70 or so pages were a little bit slow, but I mean, I just thought it was well written. And then plot, I only gave a 6 because, like I said, I was kind of confused about the plot and what was going on. Intrigue, I only gave a 6 because, again, I just didn't know what was going on with the plot and such, and so I wasn't all that intrigued as far as what was happening with the characters. I was just more confused, and I was trying to figure out that confusion versus actually being intrigued by anything. Logic, I gave a 7. It would have been lower, but knowing, like I said, that these things really happen, that bumped up the logic for me. But still, it was just crazy, and it didn't make sense the whole time I was reading it. Enjoyment, I ended up giving an 8 though, because overall I did enjoy it. So that is an average score of 7.42, which, like I said, is 4 stars. So I just. He said if you kind of like weird stories, and maybe you like a little bit, it doesn't feel like historical fiction, even though that's what I would consider it. Um, and it does kind of have that touch, but it's mostly just kind of strange. Um, so if you enjoyed that type, like just strange books, it might be worth a try. Though, like I said, I don't think it's for everybody. And like I said, the starvation and such, the way he describes it, you could really kind of picture it, and that is kind of upsetting, along with the cannibalism and, like I said, the mutilation of body parts. He doesn't get too descriptive, but enough that it disturbs you for sure. So, that is the People's Act of Love. If you come across it, like I said, you might give it a try, but I don't think it's a lot of people would enjoy it like I did. So then let's talk about The Cellar. So this is like a young adult novel, but I knew this one was kind of going to be a little bit dark as well. It reminded me a lot of The Room. I forget who authored The Room, but of course I'll insert a picture here so you can see the author and such, and I'll leave it down in the description below. But it felt like a young adult version of The Room, only you had 4 girls instead of 1. Um, and so yeah, it's I don't even know what to say about this one. There Overall, I did enjoy the story. I did think it was pretty solid, but I there was problems with it for sure. Like I said, it does deal with kidnapping. So you have this girl Summer, and she gets kidnapped by this guy, and he keeps calling her Lily. And she's like, "That's not my name," but it's like, "You're Lily now," essentially. And she gets thrown down into the cellar with 3 other girls, and so you have Rose, Poppy, and Violet. And he wants his perfect family. And so they have this nice little space down in the cellar. Like they have a little kitchen, a little living room, and they share a bedroom. But it's always 4. And then he has like these vases of flowers and such. So very creepy. And the premise of the book was sound. I just don't think the execution was necessarily there, because when it's kind of the beginning and it's Summer's viewpoint, like some of her reactions didn't make sense, or it felt rushed. Like she would have a reaction where you think would make sense, but then she would immediately kind of backtrack on it. And so it didn't feel very realistic. Like if she was in that situation, that's really how she would be reacting, and kind of based on her personality and such. That does get better as you kind of go along, and then you also have later on, you have another girl kind of gets thrown in there, and her reactions felt a little bit more realistic. And then it also goes to like the viewpoint of her Summer's boyfriend, and then also the viewpoint of the kidnapper as well. But yeah, some of the reactions just didn't feel quite right, especially in the beginning. And then in the end, it kind of was rushed. And so there were things that happened that, she was at one point and then she would kind of jump ahead and reference things that kind of happened in between there when she really should have developed those things. So the end kind of felt a little bit rushed and a little bit drawn out at the same time, if that makes any sense, because in the end you have kind of the situation addressed, but then she spends like several chapters on kind of the aftermath, I guess. And so it was, I don't know, at the same time rushed, like the things that she was addressing were kind of rushed and not developed, but then she spent a lot of time on the aftermath as well. So um like I said, I did overall end up enjoying it, but it's just like I said, some of the reactions just didn't feel very realistic, and she kind of rushed certain things, and the logic didn't make sense. Like she didn't fully explain, like she kind of hinted at, but it's like, why four girls? Like why these four flowers? And so it just needed to be developed a little bit more. Um, it just wasn't very well developed in my mind. But other than that, it was pretty enjoyable, even though it dealt with, you know dark things. Um, it was overall a good, young adult thriller, I guess. And this is part of a duology, so this is the first in the duology, and then there's one more, which I forget what it's called. Um, but there's one more after this, which again I'll make sure I put the title of the other one down below, in the description. So this one I ended up giving 3 stars. Like I said, it did feel like it was a pretty solid read. It wasn't difficult to get through or anything like that. Um, and the longer you read, the more enjoyable it became. You kind of got a better sense of the characters, even though there were still kind of those inconsistencies. So, characters, I gave a 6. They were just okay. They weren't as well developed as I would have liked. And like I said, their reactions always didn't make sense. Atmosphere, I gave a 5. Kind of just a bleh atmosphere. It actually, I think, takes place in England because it mentions London and such, but until it kind of mentioned London, like, you didn't get anything that let you know that it was England. Like, it was just very generic. Writing, I gave a 5. Again, just kind of generic writing. It wasn't the worst writing I've ever read, but it wasn't great either. Plot, I gave a 6. The plot was there, but again, it just wasn't very well developed. Intrigue, I gave a 5. Um, just kind of, man, if I could have put that book down and never picked it up, and I would have cared less. But I was intrigued enough to still keep reading it. So it was just kind of middle of the road there. Logic, I gave a 4. Like I said, like it just didn't really make sense. Like she hinted at why. Well, she kind of does explain, not explain, but he keeps referencing his mother. But it never takes a full look. So it's like, okay, like we know his mom was like this because of this, but why did it lead to this road? Essentially, like she did not develop that. So the whole premise and why four girls, like that, his family, that whole part didn't really make sense at all. And so yeah, that got a 4. And then enjoyment, I gave a 6. Like it was a solid read. Like I said, it was easy to get through, um, and I enjoyed it in the moment, but I wouldn't have been upset if I set it down and never picked it up. So that's an average score of 5.28, which, like I said, is 3 stars. Again, I'll leave the original CAWPILE creator down below if you are interested in that rating system. So those are the 2 books. Like, So very disturbing, very dark topics. This one I still just am kind of confused by, but overall I really did enjoy it. And then this one was just kind of meh for me, but it was a solid read. And so if you just want something that's quick and easy to get through and thriller vibes, this is a good one to pick up. I'm not going to pick up the second one. Like, I have no interest in that at all. But yeah, that is that. So I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys here. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.